Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Unit 2 lesson for your purposive communication class. Through this recording, we will try to discover intercultural communication and cultural diversity to different countries around the globe. And we'll also learn some tips when experiencing multicultural communication. Now, let's begin our journey. First, let's talk about culture. As defined here, culture is a term that refers to a group of community which shares common experiences that shape the way its members understand the world. So it's everything around us the moment we were born. So it includes or it also influences our views, our values, humor, our hopes, visions, dreams, loyalties, and also includes our worries and fears. So we can definitely say that culture pervades all areas, including arts and artifacts, beliefs, behaviors, and ideas, right? So in the Philippines, we have specifically the Bayanihan spirit and the concept of pagkamahiyain. So when you talk about the term bayanihan itself, it literally means being in a bayan. So which refers to the spirit of community or communal work in cooperation to achieve a particular goal. As you can see right now, what's going on viral these days on Facebook or social media is the community pantry. That is actually one way to show the culture present here in the Philippines, right? So the concept of bayanihan is actually traced back um, in their country's tradition, which can be observed in rural areas, wherein the townspeople were asked, especially the men, to lend a hand to a family who will move to a new place. They usually carry the house, right? Because these houses are built on uh, built by woods or something that is lightweight. So there are a lot of men who would carry them, who would carry the house to a new location. And the other particular culture which is present in our country is the concept of pagkamahiyain. So most of us are uncomfortable to speak or does not want to speak at all to avoid interaction. But what's the downside of this? So, if a person is shy, he or she won't feel confident while talking to someone, and that person will not have the courage to speak his or her mind. And this would greatly affect a relationship with other people. So, what are the different elements present in culture? We have religion, history, social organizations, language barrier, beliefs, cultural beliefs, values, morals, and norms. Let's talk about religion. So, when you say religion, it has been used by people to assist them in understanding the universe, natural phenomena, what to die for, and how to dwell among other people. So, it basically serves the basic function, which is actually to control. We are since we are told, right, in our religion, particularly if I would share to you, I'm a Roman Catholic, so we follow the commandments and the golden rule that is taught to us. We are um, expected to live the life of what Jesus and the God wants us to do in our life. Another function of religion is can also um, reinforce group of solidarity. It can also conflict resolution and it can also be used to explain it and explainable and offer emotional support. Next, we have history. As mentioned here, history provides stories about the past that serve as lessons on how to live the present. So it helps cement the people into what we call common culture, which creates a strong sense of identity. Third one is social organization. So social organizations represent various social unit within a culture. So this is also used to establish human interdependence and group cohesion to satisfy basic needs. When we talk about language, it is fundamental to us to the function of human culture because It's the main vehicle of cultural transmission from one generation to another. Um, Number five is beliefs. This is an individual's convictions about the world, convictions that are shaped by the culture or by the culture a person is raised in. So, the deeper a person's individual conviction, the greater the intensity of that belief. Sixth is what we have here, cultural beliefs, a belief that is held by most members of the culture. It includes fundamental teachings about what reality is, and expectations of how the world operates. Number seven, we have values. So ideals or abstract standards, whether good or bad, that members of a cultural group hold in strong affective regard. So we have the shared assumptions of judgments, what is good, what is right, and what is important. Morals here is closely related to values, and it includes cultural, societal, and religious guidelines that everyone try to follow in order to promote certain cultural values. And lastly, we have norms. So, norms are fixed behavior patterns for members of a cultural group. So, that is culturally shared notions about what is appropriate or what is the appropriate behavior. So, um, these or the given the varied elements of a culture present in one one group or one nation, we can say that the diversity of people and cultures impacts communication. So people, they're interacting with those coming from unfamiliar cultures may have difficulties in communication. So most people, they tend to conclude that miscommunication results from the speaker's lack of proficiency in a language. But what is not realized is that the fact that even if we have an excellent language skills, people will still experience miscommunication. Now let's talk about intercultural communication here. Intercultural communication is a form of, according to HAL, is a form of communication that aims to shape information across different um, cultures and social groups. So, intercultural communication is basically message sending and receiving through languages and culture. So, it's also mediated interpretation of meaning through social systems and cultures and human experiences. Um, it also studies communication across um, different cultures and social groups, how culture affects communication. And it's also often used to refer to the wide range of communication issues that arise within an organization. There are two approaches of intercultural communication. We have high context and low context culture. So this refer to the values or the value cultures plays on indirect and direct communication. Basically, when we say high context culture, it relies on implicit communication and nonverbal cues. In high context culture, or high context communication, the message cannot be understood without a great deal of background information. Say, for example, this is present among um, people in Asia, in South America. So for us, for Filipinos, it's basically seen when we are um, communicating with person of different country, right? Say for example, in a business setting, one or a foreign businessman might be introducing a business proposal to a group of Filipinos. And no matter how good he is in presenting it, the audience of Filipinos would be listening intently and nodding, right? Smiling, even applauding him at the end of the presentation. But that that business guy might be shocked to hear that after this business proposal, he was rejected. He might wonder that while he was presenting, everyone in the room was all smiling and even nodding at him. So this is actually one characteristic in high context culture. We they have to be very careful when you talk about the nonverbal cues, right? They should learn how to read between the lines because um, what is actually said isn't, or what is actually shown is not actually what they meant, right? By contrast, low context cultures, they're mostly Germanic and English speaking countries. They expect messages to be explicit and specific. If they don't like it, they don't like it. They won't sugarcoat it. Anyway, I will be giving you additional materials for this that you can read on. I'll be posting an article for you to read, discussing more on these two approaches as well as communicating across cultures. Let's move on now to the social-cultural aspect of communication. We have cultural identity, we have gender role, age identity, and social class. Basically, these are the things that were taught to us when you were in, I think, oral communication. These are the different sociocultural dimensions of interpersonal communication. And difference here, as present in Berle's model, would also constitute to a breakdown in communication. So let's try to have a review. So when we talk about cultural identity, this refers to the membership and acceptance in a larger cultural group that share a system of tradition and norms and values. When you talk about gender role, it's not necessarily limited to male and female, in which representation of gender um, inform and influence the people's understanding and expectations. So of course, we have the LGBT community. So we have to be aware of all these things. Next, we have age identity. So it refers to how people feel and think about themselves as they age. And lastly, the social class. So the rank assigned by the society to its member according to their income, titles, possessions, and etc. So these are the different aspects of intercultural communication that could affect the way people communicate. So, um, when speaking of which, how does one person learn about the culture? Okay, so we have the term inculturation. So this is the process of learning about the customs, conventions, and practices of one society. Basically, the moment we are born, right, to this world, the moment or every one of us has gone through this. So the moment we were born, um, in a particular household, allows us to learn the cultures, the rules of our own culture. Okay, so the moment we were born, so we were um, controlled how to behave, to act, and think, right? And through socialization, because we learn our culture by interacting with others. So, people at home, um, people we meet at school, church, and community, and etc. And culturation also entails learning relevant cultural patterns through family members and interactions in social environments. On the other hand, no, the process of learning another culture is called acculturation. So both enculturation and acculturation, both of this happen on subconscious and conscious levels. So they take time, practice, and are never truly or fully complete because as long as we are alive, we are learning not only the culture that we live in, but also another culture that um, we know of. So, say for example, here in the Philippines, you get to know norms, cultures, and traditions here with the popularity of Korean, so the Hallyu wave, right? So the popularity of this kind of um, pop culture allows us to learn how people behave. What's the culture like in South Korea? The food, um, famous destinations, how do they try to act in a day-to-day situation, how even the words, right? those are examples of that is an example of acculturation. So as an explanation to the reaction that people have to cultural differences, because once, say for example, you now move to a different country and without much knowledge about that country, you expect that the life that you have from your previous culture, right, the one that you've learned through enculturation, would also be the same, from which your destination uh, would be. So you might be shocked, right? To know the differences, right? That also people do it this way in this country, but we don't consider that correct in our country. So, say for example, of this culture shocks might be in the Philippines, we would always be asked to empty the food in our plate every meal because we value every grain of rice because the farmers have worked hard in producing them. But in other countries, such as in India, if you finish everything on your plate, you would be considered as disrespectful, because for them they should save at least something for their deities, for their gods and goddesses. So, as an explanation to the reactions that people have to cultural differences, so we won't fall right into a culture shock. So, the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity was created by Dr. Milton Bennett, okay, as a basic outline. So the DMIS, right, the Developmental Model of Intercultural Sensitivity, or DMIS, is a framework to explain how people experience and engage in cultural differences. Since we are very much used to the kind of culture that we lived in, it would take practice, patience, and understanding to learn and be ready to experience and engage a culture which is very much different from ours. Um, so the DMIS here is a grounded theory because when say it's a ground theory, it's based on observations that Dr. Bennett made in both academic and corporate settings, and about how people become more competent in intercultural communications. Let me show you this graph. Um, this kind of looks like a timeline, right? But this is the experience of difference concept by Dr. Bennett. So one person, so the DMIS, one person experience difference in culture through different stages. So basically, we have 6 stages here, from denial, defense, minimization, acceptance, adaptation, and integration. So from ethnocentrism, right, to being from ethno centric to being ethno relative. So that is our goal. Okay. So the first one, let's talk about denial. So, in the first stage of DMIS, we have denial. This is often created based on the belief that a person's culture is the only real culture. So, people in this stage, they fail to see cultural differences and they tend to um, isolate themselves from other groups. So, oftentimes, people that are in the stage of denial sorry, are not interested in cultural differences, and they would care less about people other than the ones that they are in direct culture. So, say for example, you might use the phrase, um, as long as we speak the same language, there's no problem, right? Because you deny that there are people who speak other languages than you do. Okay, so next it would be um, defense. Okay, in the second stage of the MIS, um, learners, they often feel as though their own culture is only good culture. So from not believing that there are culture aside from you, now you move on to the stage that you recognize that there are other cultures than yours, but you feel that your own culture is the only good culture out there. So what are examples of this? People from this stage, they try to give negative stereotyping, and They use the us, right? Us versus them thinking. Okay, so a person in defense, they might feel threatened by other cultures and their differences. So they would be very critical of other cultures and they would have a narrow focus on what appropriate behaviors and cultures are correct. So what are the normal or the common phrases that people would say in this level? So you would say, um, you know um if I could only teach you about, like, these people, they don't know much, like, but we could teach them a lot of stuff, because they should know that our culture is the best, right? They should learn how to embrace it, because once they do, they would find how amazing to live in a kind of culture that we have. Okay, so you don't think that they also enjoy the kind of culture these people have, because you believe that even if they do, what you have within yours is better than them, right? So to move out of this stage, they should be able to manage their anxiety about other cultures. Okay, they need to also embrace patience for people who belong to a different culture. So, what happens now if they move out of this stage? We move on to minimization. So now the learner try to find the commonalities between them and the other person's culture. So here, we might have superficial cultures that are mostly judged during the phase of the model. So, what are examples of superficial cultures? It could be something that's related to eating, money, and other things. So, they would try to begin to recognize that people are people, whether they have different traditions and cultures or not. So, um, I think one thing that we could admit is that many teachers fall into the stage of the DMIS. Um, you would say, like, um, no matter what culture you belong to, right? People are pretty much motivated by the same things: power, money, those kind of stuff, right? So it's gonna be a challenge to move from this level, because uh, they feel that it's already okay, right? To find commonalities and to just stay at that level. But we need to move up from this stage, because we have to develop cultural awareness and experience different. When we do, we will also benefit from strengthening our listening skills, our our practice of being open-minded, and we would learn how to work the ability to perceive others more accurately. Okay, even if they belong to a different culture. So, say for example, you have learned how to do that. We would now move on to the fourth stage, which is acceptance. But is that enough, right? Not yet, because you have to do the integration. So, what are the things that we do within the acceptance, right? It's a good thing, because we learn how to recognize and appreciate cultural difference, right, through behaviors and values. This promotes, the belief that one's culture or one's own culture is just one of many cultures out there that exist in the world. We learn to accept that, and we don't necessarily have to agree on anything, right? So if you do those things that way, just like my example earlier. So if in the Philippines we try to eat everything here, because that's how we give value and importance to our farmers. But in India, you try to save up a little. Like, we won't judge you for spoiling resources, but you learn that it's part of their culture and tradition, right? Um, they now become more curious about other cultures, and the fuel, what fuels them is the desire to learn them. But it's not enough that we just accept, because we need to gain cultural specific knowledge. We must also have to respect from others, from the values and beliefs of others, and maintain tolerance of ambiguity. Now, that's where we go to adaptation. Okay? So in the fifth stage, learners would begin to feel more competent about how communication with people of other cultures happen. So they were able to incorporate the worldview of others into their own worldview, right? So, um, a major aspect of this stage is that the learner will be able to see the world through another's eyes. So, for example, what's happening right now in Myanmar? There is a coup d'etat. A lot of protesters are asking the military government to respect the election, right? And by seeing how people are being attacked uh, by by state powers, right? We could say that it's also happening here in the Philippines, or say, for example, in America, when the people protested against the BLM for, or they stand up against said that the Black Lives Matter. Okay, so we learn how to see the world, right? From like we are able to incorporate the worldview, right, into our own view. So um, because of this perspective, they can change, or the learners can change the behavior in order to communicate more effectively. Okay, so um, say for example, we can say that um, when I interact with my male and female colleagues somewhat differently, because I want to count the differences in the way their respect is communicated. So these are like some of the things that you might do or say when you are at the adaptation stage of the DMIS. But in order to achieve adaptation and move on to the next stage, the learners must be able to experience empathy for other cultures. So we would also try to develop risk taking skills and problem solving skills. And we would also need the flexibility with other cultures. That's why we can proceed now to integration. And when we have actually from ethnocentrism, the first three here, like denial, defense, and minimization, we go now to ethno-relativism. These are the last three stages: acceptance, adaptation, and integration. So the last stage in the integration, um, it's very rare it's very rare that learners achieve this level of cultural sensitivity, because here we'll be able to have other cultural experience, right? uh, Move in and out of your own worldview. So even right, so people in this view, they would often maintain marginal self-identity and view themselves as in the process. Okay, so they try to reach integration, and they often culture um, mediators, so they can help others understand different cultures and promote unity despite the differences between these two cultures. So say for example, even if, say for example, you're working for a multinational company, so you would be maybe asked to move from one country, say for example, to another one. Say for example, at this level you're the head of the Southeast Asia, so from Philippines you might move to Myanmar or Singapore or to Hong Kong, and now you would be given um, higher level promotion. Say for example, you now handle a particular say for example, you not only represent Southeast Asia, right? You might be handling different countries, right, outside Asia. It could be, say for example, Europe, right? So part of this is you learn that you learn their cultural, you try to accept, you try to adapt, and try to integrate that to your own. So you feel like everywhere you go, right? Uh, Everywhere is like home, because if you know enough about how things work there, you wouldn't feel so out of place. You would learn how to easily adapt You would learn how to easily interact with people because you have a sufficient knowledge at this level of cultural sensitivity uh, within yourself. Okay, so those are the no, the 6 stages of the DMIS model. So how people experience and engage cultural differences from the DMIS model, and it's actually our reference when we try to improve ourselves when you talk about being culturally sensitive. So the DMIS, or the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity by Milton J. Bennett. So what are our takeaways in today's lesson? Okay. But before we go here, let's try to review things that we talked here about culture, elements of culture, intercultural communication, interculturation, or enculturation, acculturation, the DMIS. So, what are our takeaways for today's recording? So, we have two things here. So, the first one is that the diversity of people, right, and culture impacts our communication. So, communicating with people coming from unfamiliar cultures poses challenges. That's why we have to be very much aware of those differences so we know how to work around them. And the second one would be the success of intercultural communication does not depend on skills alone. Remember what I've said earlier? It's not only about the speaker's level of proficiency in speaking a particular language, because we have to consider the openness and sensitivity to cultural diversity, as well as a genuine desire to understand and be understood. So it's very important that we study um, intercultural communication, or communication in multicultural settings, because it helps us students to develop skills and knowledge about cultural awareness and sensitivity to others, and to question um, and the questions of diversity in the workplace in the future, and can also help us converse with other cultures more comfortably. I hope that you have learned something from this recording, and I hope to see you again next meeting. Have a good day and goodbye.